Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Harmon Museum September Lunch and Learn. I'm John Zimkus, the Education Director and Historian here. We've got some exciting things going on at the museum you might want to take part of. The museum, Harmon Museum's Ghost Walk will be in October, Friday and Saturday nights, October 11th and 12th, 18th and 19th, and 25th and 26th, 7 p.m., $15 for members and $20 for non-members of the society. They will go through a few blocks of downtown Lebanon and talk about known activity. A new art exhibit, Reflections in Glass, will be opening up a week from this Friday, September 27th. The artist is Darren Goodman. This will be at, there'll be a hors d'oeuvres and an open house, 6:30, and wine and hors d'oeuvres, and that will be free, so you might want to enjoy that. Darren grew up in Maineville, attended college in Bowling Green State University, first apprenticed with glass master Leon Applebaum in Corning, New York, and has studied with glass legends Dante Maroni and David Salvador. In 2005, he opened up his own glass studio in Waynesville. And 2 years later, in 2007, he was contacted by the Ferrari North America and to create trophies for the international challenge races for Ferraris. He has also worked in a glass mural at the new World Trade Center in New York. So having his artwork, his glass work, it'll stay up until I believe the first week or so of November. I think it is something you will enjoy to see. Please remember there is a discount today at the gift shop for all of you, 10% off. So if you want to take a look, some of the books we have there and we have some treasures of the museum. These are things that we have multiple copies of or don't fit our particular displays. So there are some antiques, if you will, or interesting collectibles you can pick up there. As far as lunch and learns go, next month, October 16th, Nellie Bly Daredevil reporter, author Tanya Mitchell will be talking about the famous Nellie Bly. She is the person who, after reading Jules Verne, decided if you can go around the world in 80 days, and she did it faster than 80 days. And this was, of course, 150 years ago. On November 20th, we have Military Women's Memorial. Colonel Judy Pearson, U.S. Air Force retired. We'll talk about this memorial in Arlington Cemetery. December 18th, we have Christmas concert with the Bones of Cincinnatus. 5 trombonists, and they are fantastic. You will thoroughly enjoy them. They won't need a microphone to be heard. January 15th, our good friend Fred Compton comes back. 3 centuries of Golden Lamb 2.0. He'll talk about more things he discovered. He started working at the Golden Lamb as a busboy while he was going through college and high school and decided to stay there for 30 plus years. Left as an assistant manager. And he has collected stories and artifacts, and you'll thoroughly enjoy him, as we often do. Another good friend is coming back. Linda Martin, who is with us today. About 4 or 5 years ago, I was given Linda's name, and I heard, there's this lady up in Centerville. She has got all this Halloween decorations, and she's got hundreds of them. So we had her here. What we were going to have, but COVID hit, so we tried to do a virtual one. It didn't quite work out, but finally, when restrictions were lifted, she did a fantastic job. And going back 100 years in Halloween decorations. And then as she was packing up, he said, you know, John, I've got Christmas decorations too. So a year later, we had the Christmas decorations, and that was fantastic. And she's cleaning up, and around that same time, she says, John, did I ever tell you I have Easter decorations? And so we had Easter. Now, unfortunately, I missed the Easter decorations. I was not feeling well that time. But now, she told me a few months ago, I've got Valentine's decorations. So this will be on February 18th. 4 days for her to take it down from her house, pack it up, and bring it over here. And it also gives her husband time to clean that part of the basement. So you'll enjoy decorations for Valentine's Day through the years. On March 18th, we have Frank Duveneck, The Greatest Brush, a brief look at his life and loves. Arguably the greatest artist to come out of Cincinnati. Author James Ott will talk about Frank Duveneck and how his work at around the turn of into the 20th century and the first decades of the 20th century. One last thing I want to talk about is a man who was part of our Lunch and Learn family for a number of times. Jeff Wilson. I don't know if any of you remember Jeff. He wrote 3 books. They were Ohio Legends. A sweet guy, a funny guy. He was working for FedEx for some 22 years, and then after retiring from that, he opened up JP Signs in Vandalia. He was the J, his wife Patty was the P. And he loved drawing, and he decided to do sort of a Ripley's Believe It or Not thing. Nobody was interested. He contacted over 100 publications, and then he decided, I'm gonna put it into a book. And he initially did it for children, but he found out adults liked it. So I read about him, I called him up, and in 2017, at first he said, I'm not a public speaker, I won't do well. And I said, you'll do fine. And with the help of his daughter, who was a teacher, he came up with a PowerPoint. His wife, Patty, would man the projector, and the people loved him. He was fantastic. A couple of years later, he came up with volume 2. And once again, I mean, his speaking career began with us. He actually told the Dayton Daily in April of 2020, after publishing the first book, he sold some copies at the Warren County Historical Society and Harmon Museum as a fundraiser. He was asked to give a PowerPoint and have a book signing. He was hesitant at first, but he filled 30 minutes with some laughs and raised some money for the museum. He came back with his third. And in the third, one of the things that thrills me about the third is that he had some ideas from Warren County in Lebanon. This is the one right over here about horror in Lebanon, 1844, the Harner sisters. 4 sisters who lived on what is now Main Street or Shakertown Road, as it was once called, and were all killed instantly when lightning struck the house in 1844. A good friend, he bought us a stone in our history walk. It'll say Jeff Wilson, Ohio Legends. And when his wife contacted me about his passing about last week, she did inform me that in lieu of flowers, one of the places that donations can be made would be where he began his speaking career at the Warren County Historical Society. So I checked with Liz Gerwelman, our gift shop coordinator and director. We only have 1 copy left, but I will contact the family, see if we can get more books brought in. As some of you know, I taught 7th graders for a number of years. And I had the Ohioan of the Day. And I started that in August of 1972. every day I determined to have a new Ohioan for my Ohio history class. This was pre-internet, so I had encyclopedias and almanacs and Ohio almanacs and everything else opened, and I struggled to have a new person. And I did come up with a new person every day. If I had Jeff's books, I would never have to worry, because his book is filled with fascinating stories about Ohioans and things in Ohio, and he will be greatly missed. I talked to him last in the spring. I called him up and I asked, would he want to be a speaker this fall? And he sounded good, but he said his memory wasn't what it used to be, and he'll let me know. And unfortunately, things went down from that, and we lost him. As you can see, he was only 70 years old by 6 days when he passed away. A good friend and a talented man, Jeff Wilson. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Enjoy your meal, and we'll have our speaker in about 20 minutes or so. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to the Harmon Museum's Lunch and Learn for September. Our speaker today is Randy Overbeck. Randy is a former neighbor of mine. He is a former boss of mine. He is the parent of a former student of mine. So I've been aware and I've been friends with Randy for a number of years. He has got a whole new career after leaving education. He was superintendent and assistant superintendent in Lebanon, worked in the Xenia School District, I believe, and spent over 30 years doing that. But then he has turned to writing mysteries, and he has been very, very successful. His Haunted Shores mystery series has won 9 awards. His latest book, Wild Rose Press released, Cruel Lessons, has won 2 more awards. He has a popular podcast, great stories about great storytellers, and he is a member in good standing of the Mystery Writers of America. He has spoken on various topics about writing in a variety of different places. He told me earlier he's been to New Jersey, he's been to Florida, and all over Ohio. He's going to be talking today about a few of his favorite haunts. His Haunted Shore mysteries often have him explore actual legends, and many of these things he has incorporated in his books, and others he has learned about but hasn't quite used. But you're going to find out about him today. Ladies and gentlemen, Randy Overbeck.
I'm delighted to be here and to share my, I think you'll find a very fun and interesting presentation about famous haunted places and the histories behind them. Before I do that, I've got just 2 little things. First, on your table, there's a sign-up sheet for my newsletter. If I intrigue you, there's not one over there. We'll get you one over there. If I intrigue you throughout the day and you're interested, please sign up. Please be careful to print your email address. I can't tell you how many times I'm sitting there and I show my wife and go, is that a D or an R? Do you know? I really would appreciate that. I'm not a big newsletter person. I only send out about once a month. You're not going to get bombarded. And of course, I never share your email address with anybody, anything else. Okay, so having done that, let me kind of start. You're supposed to start with a story. So I'm here to talk about ghosts. So I've got an appropriate ghost story. So this story is about 2 elderly gentlemen by the name of Earl and Leo, who were the very best of friends. They did everything together, but what they loved to do most was play golf. They played golf all the time, every chance they had, every day that they could. But as they got up in years, they kind of recognized that they weren't going to be around forever. So they made a pact. Whichever one of them passed first, it was his responsibility to come back and tell his partner what it was like on the other side. As life would have it, Leo passed first, and his friend was just devastated. He couldn't hardly get out of bed. He was so so unhappy. And about the second day after the funeral, Earl was laying in bed, trying to get himself up, and he lifted his head up, and there at the foot of his bed is the ghost of Leo. And he went, "Is that you? Is that really you?" He said, he said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, we made a pact." He said, "Well, tell me, what's it like?" He said, "You want the good news or do you want the bad news?" He said, "Well, give me the good news." He said, "Oh, the golf up here is fantastic. You never miss a shot." He said, "Today I hit a 90-foot putt." And Earl said, "Well, that's great. What's the bad news?" He said, "You have a tea time tomorrow at 7:20. I am going to share with you a lot about ghosts. But before I do, I want to kind of tell you that I don't pretend to be an expert in this area. What happened was that as I was writing the first of these books, and then the later two more, soon to be three more, I did a lot of research. My books have a great deal of research. And then I started researching about ghosts, and I was amazed at what I learned. So I'm going to share a little bit about what I learned with you, kind of in conjunction with talking about famous places around here that are haunted. So what I did is I kind of researched places that people either knew about as being haunted, in some cases didn't know about being haunted. And then I kind of looked behind what's the story behind those. So I'm going to share those with you. So the first is the single most haunted place within probably about 500 miles. This particular Music Hall, in case you don't know this, Music Hall has been on about every ghost show on television. Any paranormal investigator worth his salt that wants to get a production has been to Music Hall, and here's why. Music Hall was actually built on the site of a former orphanage. In fact, when they were putting the foundation in, they discovered a graveyard of kids right where Music Hall is currently located. And there have been numerous reports of ghosts of children running in the rafters of Music Hall late during productions. And several of those have found their way onto TV shows. The second one is not with us anymore, but it's still worthwhile. So I don't know if anybody in here has ever been to Bobby Mackey's Bar. It's a very famous music place, just recently closed down. And they've been doing music for a century there. I think it goes back to the 1920s. But what you may not know, there's a very somber part of Mackey's, the history of Mackey's Bar. There are mob connections that go back into the 1920s and 30s, and supposedly there were over 40 murders that occurred in the basement of Bobby Mackey's Bar. And according to a legend that I dug up in the 20s, there was supposed to be a satanic cult that operated down there. It had the reputation for being the most haunted bar, the most haunted music venue in the United States. In fact, until it closed, it was the only place I knew of that ran what John was just talking about. We're running ghost tours here in October. It was so popular, they ran ghost tours every week, and the ghost tours were full. I love this story about the Dayton Masonic Temple. Has anybody been there? Who's been to the Masonic Temple? Okay, a few. So you can see what it looks like. Now, you've all passed it on I-75. It's just off to the left going north on I-75. And I was told this story by somebody that works there. Somebody told me that this what I'm about to describe to you has happened to several visitors. When you come in, you're greeted by a docent, at least if you're not part of a group that's meeting there. You're greeted by a docent, and the docent is like one is here, shows you around, tells you what's in the Masonic Temple. Well, according to this story, there's a docent that meets visitors coming in, takes the visitors around, shows them different places, and they finish the visit with what you and I would think of as graduation photos. Only they're photos of the men, the Masons, over the years. And this particular docent points to a particular person in this group of photos and then disappears. And the photo is him from 1940 something. Okay. And there have been a number of visitors have described this particular ghost experience. This one is not as well known, so you may not have heard of this. This is in Claremont County. But there's I know the history behind this is true. I can't vouch for the ghost part because that's never happened to me, but in a place called Camp Dennison, I don't know how many know where that is, and on this date, July 14, 1863, this gentleman, Cornelius Conway, who was a Union trained, was killed by a Confederate raiding party in Ohio at Camp Dennison. I don't know all the details about the Civil War part, and the skirmish did not end up with the Confederates taking the area, but they were trying to take the area, and they did take this train. And this man died. Supposedly, people who live there have told me that if you go down on this particular track in Camp Dennison, at night, you'll see Cornelius still walking the tracks with his lamp back and forth up on the track. This is probably one of my favorites. So I spent, as John was saying, that I actually served children in this state for 40 years. 28 of those years I ran school districts. I ran 4 different school districts as either superintendent, assistant superintendent. In the last 16 of my career, I ran a district in Lebanon. And we would have a group get together of administrators and teacher leaders at different places. We ended up at the Netherland Hilton. It's kind of a long story, but the people there were fantastic to us. But we went there for about 11 years, I think, each summer going back to training. And as we went there, we started to get to know the staff, the serving staff. And they started telling me stories about the ghosts that frequent it. And there actually are several ghosts that frequent the Netherland Hilton, but this was the most common one. So they have a ghost, a very famous ghost called the Lady in Green. And the Lady in Green is supposed to be the wife of a painter. So Netherland Hilton, if you don't know the history of the building, was built during the Depression. It was built in the 30s up, I don't remember what the date was it was finished, 39 or 41, something like that. And in those days, they did not take the precautions for workers that they do today. And there were quite a few workers that died in the process of the construction of that building. One of those workers that died was a painter who was painting the interior of the structure. And in those days, as the building was being built, the construction people were allowed to live in the parts that were already finished. So they didn't have to go someplace else and find, because they came from all over. Anyway, this couple, man and wife, he was a painter and lived there, and the wife was very well known around. She wore this beautiful green dress. Well, when the painter died, she was so depressed, she went up to the 40th floor, jumped, and committed suicide. Today, workers that work in the Netherland Hilton will tell you they see this lady in the green dress frequenting where their apartment was on whatever floor that was on the Netherland Hilton. So if you go down to this day, you may see a shimmering lady. And as I mentioned, she's been seen most by workers, but several guests have seen her as well. Victoria Theater, I love this story. The Victoria Theater, I'm assuming you all know Victoria Theater, right? Okay, I've been there, my wife and I have been there several times. I didn't know this story. So according to the legend, according to the research I did, in the early 1900s, a young actress, I wasn't able to find out what her name was, but a young actress coming to Victoria Theater to do a show went into a dressing room and never came out. They don't know what happened to her. They never found her body. They never found any evidence of her. She just literally disappeared. Well, life went on, and they kept bringing more people. Supposedly, in that dressing room today, actresses and actors have said that they will go to the mirror, and instead of seeing their own reflection, they see this lady dressed in 1900s costumes looking back. In fact, there are a number of actors that will not take that dressing room. If they give them to them, they'll go, nope, I'm not taking that dressing room. And of course, I could not do famous ghost places and leave out the Golden Lamb. John has plenty more stories than I do, but I do like this one. So the Golden Lamb is in fact host to more than one ghost, several ghosts. The most famous ghost is Sarah Stubbs, who lived in the Golden Lamb for several years and likes to roam the 4th floor. Several guests have reported seeing the ghost of Sarah Stubbs. And Sarah is kind of different because, as I will tell you in a minute, most ghosts frequent the place of their death, like the lady in green at the Netherland Hilton. But Sarah didn't die at the Golden Lamb. They moved somewhere else and she died later. But she's chosen to come back and frequent the Golden Lamb. Maybe she likes the beds. I doubt that, but it might be the food. I don't know. This is my favorite because it actually has a family connection. This is actually related to the darker parts of my ancestors. So I don't know how many of you know the story of George Remus, but George Remus was Ohio's version of Al Capone. So George Remus became very, very successful as a bootlegger. And he did other, not so, besides selling booze, he was into other racketeering, other extortion, lots of other things. So much so that the FBI went after him. And the FBI sent an agent to do the investigation, as they normally do. So-and-so was assigned, and the agent went and started sniffing around, trying to figure out what was going on. And the agent was able to turn George Remus's wife, who was no picnic herself, and George Remus's wife and the FBI agent fell in love. Well, George was no fool. He had spies everywhere and people that were telling him what was going on, including up in the FBI, and he knew what was happening. So he took his wife to Eden Park, to that gazebo at Eden Park, and in 1927, he murdered his wife, shot his wife in the gazebo. Okay? Story doesn't end there. Of course, it was known that George shot his wife, so it wasn't a federal crime, so they put him on trial locally for murder. George got off. George is actually the first person ever to claim temporary insanity as a defense and win. Today, especially around the time that she was murdered, if you visit Eden Park, you may likely run into George's wife, who still frequents that particular one. Now, what's the connection between my family? Well, in addition to many other things that George was in, he was also into guns, of course. My grandfather had the largest gun store in Cincinnati, and my grandfather was the pipeline of guns for George Remus and other nefarious characters that lived in Cincinnati in that area. Okay, so those are some of my favorite ones. I thought what would kind of segue nicely with that would be to share with you kind of what I learned in my research in terms of talking about ghosts. So I did this presentation on Thursday, or one like this, and one of the first questions I ask is, well, why do ghosts come out at night? Very good question. The research from what I know is that ghosts are trying to avoid interacting with human beings, so they are trying to come when there is the least amount of activity. That's why they are most often seen at night. They're as afraid of human beings as human beings are of them. From almost all the research that I've done, most, not all, but most ghosts appear to be the victim of unexpected or sudden death. It takes a lot of psychic energy, they believe, for ghosts to make itself known physically. In fact, the most common visual example or visual demonstration that a ghost can do is to create an orb. Anybody know what an orb is? Okay. An orb, I got a picture of an orb there. An orb is a spherical ball of light that is in a contained space, usually a room like this, that moves without any scientific explanation. So it'll move around like this. and that is the most common way that we have ever encountered visually ghosts. I've actually seen, people say, well, have you seen ghosts? I've actually seen an orb in a ghost walk that I did in Nashville. Spirits usually appear at the place of their death, with the exception of Sarah that I just gave you. Experts believe that it's probably because they're unable to leave. This is really important because oftentimes you will hear stories or you will hear something about ghosts walking through a wall. Ghosts can't walk through walls. Okay, what they believe the ghost is doing is that where the ghost is coming through the wall was a doorway in a different time. So they're actually moving through where they would normally be. Now this one was what is one of the most interesting. It's actually what kind of pushed me over the edge to decide to incorporate ghost stories in my mysteries. I was at a writing conference almost 10 years ago now. And as you go to the conference, I don't know if any of you have done this. I go to a conference and you highlight, I want to go to this, want to go to this, want to go to this. Well, one of the sessions I had picked, the person didn't show. They were sick or something. And I went, all right, what am I going to go? Okay, well, there was one on by a paranormal society. In fact, it's the Central Indiana Paranormal Society. It was doing a presentation on ghosts. I went, oh, okay, I'll try that. So they came in and told me about it. They told me this story that I'm going to share with you. The first thing they did was they said, well, they were doing an investigation of a report of a ghost in a room about a fourth the size of this room. Imagine this room divided in four, so one corner. They did what was typical in those days, or still is. They went into the room from 12 o'clock at night till 3 o'clock in the morning. They brought photographic equipment, visual equipment, or audio equipment, video equipment, temperature equipment, and then some other electronic stuff has to do with ghosts I won't go into right now. But so what they did is then they showed us the results, and they said, well, here's what we learned. They showed us an audio recording that they purported to be a recording of a ghost in the room. And the recording went something like this. Please help me. Please help me. It was clearly the voice of a woman, but I went, you can fake that. Maybe you did it, maybe you did, I don't know. Well, then they showed me this next one, which just blew me away. So one of the things that's pretty standard with ghosts, paranormal investigators, is they bring a thermometer like the one you see there, an analog thermometer, like that. And so there is no human error. They take a video camera, and the video camera runs for 3 hours, simply fixated on that. And they said, okay, I want you to watch this. So I don't remember, it's been 10 years, but it was an empty room. The temperature was maybe 61, 60 degrees, something like that. In 10 seconds, that thermometer dropped 20 degrees. Just, and I went, what? And then it stayed down for about 2 minutes and came back up. And they fast forwarded several times, and it happened 3 different times in the 3 hours. Happened once every hour. They hypothesized that that is the ghost entering and leaving the room, creating some kind of cold energy. After I learned this 10 years ago, I did research and I found out it is the single most documented evidence of ghosts, and has been documented thousands of times all over the world. Where they believe a ghost is, they've had this same occurrence of which there is no scientific explanation at all. We don't really know why, but ghosts are able to leave images on photos and videos. At least, I've not seen any evidence of digital photos. They can't do that. But somehow, on films, they were able to leave some kind of impression that even the human eye might not have seen it. Okay. So I thought, well, that kind of, every place I go, they would like to see more of a, how do you have any evidence? Well, the reason that we don't have better conclusive evidence of ghosts is one word. It's called Photoshop. Because today, you can make anything look like anything. And that's before AI. I have no idea what AI will do to that. So what I'm going to share with you all predates all that. So I'm sharing with you photos that have been verified by photo experts. They're not touched up. Nobody's done any funky stuff to these photos. They're all old. You'll see several of them are very old. And they all capture or purport to capture a ghost. Thank you. So this first one, you would have, I will show you it, but if you want to do a real close examine, you should go online and look at it. This is available online. You can see this online. So the ghost is called Goddard's Squadron, okay? And this photo was taken in 1919. And it's just a picture of the group of guys in the World War I squadron in England, okay? Here's the ghost part. So there's a ghostly image behind the fourth left top row, all right? So right here, which you can't see at all from there, but you can see here, there's an image of a man, very clear image of that face. The face belongs to Freddie Jackson, who was killed in a dogfight 2 days before the photo was taken. All right. This is Lord Cumberland, again, very poor photo by our quality today, taken in 1891. So I didn't know this, but if you were rich in the late 1800s, especially in England, while your funeral was going on, they hired a photographer to come in and photograph everything so people wouldn't steal it. Everybody's at the funeral. So this photographer is taking this picture of Lord Cumberland's study while his hearse is riding by out front. And you can see very clearly, there's a picture of Lord Cumberland sitting right there in his chair. Decide for yourself. This one is much more recent, but it's still pre-digital. It's called The Ghost Pilot. This is from 1987. So this lady was visiting an airfield, kind of like Wright Pat is here, where they have all kind of planes and stuff, and she's actually sitting in a helicopter. Okay? Now, if you look very carefully, she was alone. She had her friends with her taking a picture, but she was sitting in there alone. But there's very clear image of when they looked up later, they found out this was the pilot of the helicopter who was killed in combat. This one, I did my research, but I don't have as much conclusive information. This one's called Mrs. Andrews' Baby. This is also a very famous photo, taken in 1947. The people who visited the grave, the parents of the little boy buried in that grave, said they had never seen the girl. When they took this picture, okay, mom and dad took the picture of their son's cemetery plot, who had died. They didn't see any little girl, but when they came home and took the photo, this little girl shows up. They don't have any idea who the ghost of the little girl is. They think it might be, there's several little girls buried nearby. They think it might be the ghost of one of the kids buried, came over to play with the boy who's dead. I don't know how many of you know about the Waverly Hills Sanitarium. Do you know about him? So Waverly Hills Sanitarium used to be, it's torn down now, but it used to be one of the most haunted places in Ohio. They ran really scary haunted tours in October in this place before they tore it down. Well, this is a picture taken in 2006 before they tore it down at that. And that picture is a picture of a young nurse by the name of Mary Lee, who worked at the hospital when it was operating. Mary Lee, the story about Mary Lee is Mary Lee got pregnant by a doctor at the hospital, went to the doctor, he refused to marry her or do anything. Supposedly she was so distraught she hung herself, killed herself and the baby. And people who knew her said that is very clearly the image of Mary Lee. Okay, so that kind of brings me full circle back to how did I get from all of that research to my book. So my Haunted Shore Mysteries appeared in these 3 years, in 19, 20, 21. And I'd like to share this because this is actually the first review that came out. The first reviewer called it a cold case murder mystery wrapped in a ghost story, served with a side of romance, set in a stunning resort location. Now, doesn't that sound like something you'd want to read? Now, one thing that's very different, I heard somebody say, am I going to be scared? The answer is no. And I have a little, I'm going to get on my soapbox here. So in this country, if you've read ghost stories or viewed ghost stories, they almost always fall in one of two categories. They're in the category that I call the Stephen King category, where the ghost is absolutely terrifying, scares the bejeevers out of everybody. Or, if it's not that, it's what I call Casper the Friendly Ghost stories. And that's where my grandmother owned a bookstore and she died, and the ghost of my grandmother helps me solve mysteries. Okay? What I learned in my research is neither of those have any evidence, scientific evidence to back them up. I could find almost no verifiable evidence that ghosts are either terrifying or are they Casper. In fact, one of the things that I did was I wanted to make sure that the ghosts, as I portray them, only do things that I've actually found in the research about ghosts that the ghosts do. So the ghosts don't solve mysteries, they don't tell who the bad guy is, they don't do any of those things, because in real life, ghosts don't do that. One of the things that I did, so in case you didn't know this, in 2019, when my first mystery came out, that year, there were 700,000 mystery titles published in 1 year. Okay, on the day my book came out, there were 11,000 new titles. Okay, so I had to figure out, well, how do I make mine stand out, do something different than everybody else is doing? So here are the few things I did. The first thing I did was I did pick a stunning resort location, but I didn't pick the ones that you would think of. The ones that when you say resort location comes to your mind, okay? So for example, the first one is on the Chesapeake, the eastern shore of the Chesapeake Bay. Who's been there? Okay, and that's about what I get in every, and this is obvious. My wife and I have vacationed there about 6 times now, maybe 7 times. In our humble opinion, it is the most gorgeous place in the United States in the fall. There isn't a more beautiful place than sitting on a sailboat in the middle of Chesapeake Bay on about October 15th and the shore just exploding around you. Did you know that the Chesapeake Bay has the largest shoreline of anywhere in the United States? There's more waterfront in that area than any place else. So that's where my first book takes place. The second book takes place in Cape May, New Jersey. Who's been to Cape May? All right, same thing. All right, now Cape May is actually the oldest beach in the United States. People have been coming to this resort beach for 150 years. But if you're not from New York, New Jersey, Delaware, western or eastern Pennsylvania, you don't know about Cape May. Cape May, among many of the things that recommends it, has the largest collection of Victorian architecture. See, they have 170 restored bed and breakfasts and Victorian bed and breakfasts and mansions in a town of 5,000 people. It's absolutely, if you love architecture, it's absolutely breathtaking. Just walk the streets and it's incredible. It didn't hurt me, didn't hurt any of that. It's also the most haunted seaport on the eastern shore, so that kind of worked for us as well. The third one is in Crystal River, Florida. I'll tell you about the fourth one before I'm done. Anybody been to Crystal River? No? You traveled well. Crystal River is it's on the Gulf Coast, about an hour north of Tampa. It's very old Florida, very small town. It's got a nice little beach. It's supposed to be one of the best places in the world for runners and bikers. They have all these that go through swamps and along the shores and everything. But what it's most famous for, it's the only place in America you can swim with manatees. Between the middle of December and the middle of February, the manatees come in from the Gulf Coast into a lagoon, into a freshwater lagoon. And for a relatively small price, you can get on a wetsuit and swim with manatees. So that's where I chose that. The other thing that makes my book stand out is my heroes are different. All my real heroes have always been teachers, like John and like Gail. So I thought, well, if I'm going to write a fictional story, then I'm going to make my fictional heroes teachers as well. For this series, my hero is Daryl Henshaw, who's a high school social studies teacher and researcher, not unlike John. And also he's a coach. He coaches basketball and football. The only trouble is he sees ghosts, although he's not really very happy about that particular skill, and he has some other OCD problems we'll talk about in a minute. If I created a hero, hero's got to have a partner. So he has Erin Cavaney, who's not a teacher, she's an OB nurse. and she doesn't see ghosts, but she becomes his rock and sleuth partner. As John mentioned, these 3 books have won 9 national awards, including Best Book Award, Gold Award, Mystery of the Year. I'm very proud. They've also earned hundreds of 5-star reviews from either readers or critics, both. If you were looking, there were several that I scrolled up there. I'm going to give you like the 30-second version of each one, and then I'll finish this up and have it open for questions. So in the first book, Daryl is a Midwesterner like us. He's actually from Michigan, but he's a Midwesterner who gets dumped at the altar. And all he wants to do is start his life over. He puts out all these job searches, and he finally finds this job, which he thinks is the perfect job, on the Eastern Shore, where he is going to teach social studies and coach football and basketball. The only trouble is when he gets there, he finds out that this little tiny athletic office that he has is haunted by a ghost that had been killed some 30 years earlier at the school. In the second book, he actually creates such a problem in his new town, he loses his job. Sounds like me. And then he moved from there, and as a teacher, he's got to find some way to support himself. So he gets on as a summer job in a football camp at Cape May. And when he gets there, he ends up stumbling onto another ghost that haunts him called the Haunted Bride. And he also ends up stumbling on a major crime ring. And then in the third book, so there's a romantic arc in the 3 books. They meet in the first book, fall in love in the second book, and they're actually on their honeymoon in the third book. Only trouble is their honeymoon is interrupted by the ghosts of 2 murdered immigrant children that haunt Daryl and want him to find justice for them. The books are $20 each. And I should say that Blood on the Chesapeake became a #1 bestseller on Amazon in 21. Crimson at Cape May became the #2 best-selling ghost story in the United States, ahead of Stephen King, ahead of Dean Koontz, ahead of Shirley Jackson, ahead of every other book, except some YA book I never heard of. And whenever I speak, my publisher allows me, to places that I speak, to package the 3 of them up in a what we call the trilogy for just $50. It's not too soon to think about Christmas and people you have on your list that may be great readers. It would be a great gift for them. And I'm going to talk about my newest novel, which I believe is the best I've written so far. It's a new series called Lessons in Peril. It's a very different kind. It's not paranormal. It's not ghost. It's actually the story of a middle school in Ohio, where a drug pusher is pushing drugs on, and some kids in 5th grade get a hold of the drugs, end up using them and dying as a result in a car accident. And the story is about the school and the police working together to find out who's pushing the drugs into this school. It also has done very well. In fact, it won 2 awards. It was the Mystery of the Year in 2023 when it came out. It's a little bit newer, so it's a little more expensive. It's $22. I also like to mention, so on your table, I put this on there. So one of the things that I do with my books is each book, even though it's a fun read, the book is focused on an issue that our country is struggling with. So the first book is about racism. The second book is about human trafficking. The third book is about abuse of migrants in the South. The third book is about student drug abuse. And I'm partnering with this organization called Natural High. So if you have a connection with school, Natural High is an organization that provides resources for parents or teachers to talk to kids about drugs and drug use, because they found the research says that's the most successful way to keep kids off drugs, and they do it all for free. So I partnered with this organization, and a portion of every sale of that book goes to that particular group. On a few tables, I have one book that's called A Backlist, that's 10 years ago, called Leave No Child Behind, if your taste runs to a thriller type. This one is a really scary thriller about terrorist takeover of a high school here in Ohio, and the teacher and a volunteer that happens to be a Navy SEAL that's in the building defeats the terrorist cell that has invaded their building. I am able to accept cash, check, and credit card. Thank you very much. I want to tell you a little bit about my podcast, because I think you might be interested. So I put, did I do that? Ooh. I put on everybody's table, I think I did, a couple cards in case you have an interest. So anybody who's a podcast listener? Anybody? Raise your hand if you're a podcast listener. That's about what I get every place. So after you hear this, you may want to be interested in this. So my podcast is called Great Stories About Great Storytellers. And it takes famous people you know, famous authors, directors, and poets you know, and I tell you the backstories about them you don't know. So you remember Paul Harvey, the rest of the story? This is Paul Harvey, the rest of the story about famous authors, directors, and poets. I'm going to give you one of those here in just a minute, and that's this one. This is actually the very first podcast. And the podcasts are all short, about 10 to 15 minutes. So I'm going to do this in about 3 minutes, so I'm going to really shorten it. So you might remember this man, John Grisham. Anybody remember this obscure author by the name of John Grisham? Yeah. All right, so now John Grisham, in 1987 and 88, when he was writing this book, he was a very successful lawyer in Mississippi, and he was actually a member of the House of Representatives in Mississippi. So he was really busy. He had a lot on his plate, but in a conference I went to, he told us that he had viewed, it wasn't his trial, but he had viewed a rape trial of these young men. And it inspired him to write the story. Now you need to know the story in order for the rest of this to make sense. So in case, I'll give it to you here. So in the story, 2 idiot rednecks find and rape a 12-year-old black girl, tie her behind their truck, and drag her around the rural area and kill her. Her dad finds out who these 2 guys are, hunts them down and kills them. Believe it or not, I haven't spoiled the book for you. That happens in about 11 pages. The book is really about what happens to the town as a result of this trial of this black man. Okay, so now that you know that. So John is right. He writes this story and he thinks it's pretty good. I think it's good. I think we'll be okay. He wants desperately to get it published, and he tries like crazy. Nobody is interested. He said in his office at his house, he has an entire wall of paper with rejection slips from editors, agents, and publishers for that book to remind him of where he came from. And the short version of the story is somewhere along that sojourn, an agent in Florida, he did get it published by a small press in Florida. And in those days, in 1989, what they did, there's no ebooks. They ran a standard run of 5,000 copies. It didn't sell. John was absolutely beside himself. He couldn't believe it didn't sell. It went out of print. John said, that can't be. John quit his job. I told my wife, I said, that's an interesting, I would like to have listened in on that dining room conversation. Honey, I know you put me through law school. I appreciate that, but I don't want to do that anymore. He went to the publisher and he got boxes of books and threw them in the back of his car. And he went from small bookstore to small bookstore and said, just put 4 books up. If they sell, send the money to the publisher. If they don't sell, I'll come back and get them. Now that's commitment. To make a long story short, an agent got a hold of the book in Florida, I think he said, read the book, liked it, and eventually gets back to John and says, this is pretty good. He said, but you already have a publisher for this. Are you working on anything else? I'd like to represent you. And he said, well, I'm just about finished with my next book called The Firm. The Firm. And the rest, as they say, is history. So that's my long-winded way of saying, don't you today wish you could get your hands on one of those 5,000 first edition copies of A Time to Kill? You can't, but you can get mine, which is the next best thing. And it'll be autographed, so it'll be worth a fortune someday. I hope I've intrigued you enough that you may have an interest in one of my stories, but even if I haven't, you can help me. So if you are a nobody like me, the only way that works is word of mouth. So I gave everybody a bookmark. Just like we do in class, show me your bookmark, children. Okay? Take the bookmark. If you're not a mystery lover, you know somebody who is. I want you to take this bookmark to that mystery lover and say, well, this guy gave this neat presentation on ghosts. I know you're going to like, you got to check his book out. And they'll tell somebody, and then they'll tell somebody else, and then before you know it, I'm rich and famous. All right, so that kind of brings me to the end of my Few Favorite Haunts presentation. I'm more than happy to see if you have any questions, if I have stirred any questions in you that I can answer. and John is ready. Don't let John intimidate. I said, oh, don't tell them you got to put a microphone in their face. Nobody's going to say anything. Oh, we got one. He's coming.
Where did you do all your research on ghosts? Is it all on the internet?
No,
or is it many, many different resources?
Clearly, I did a lot of research on the internet, but I also met with paranormal investigators to talk with them about how they did their work and what they saw, what they didn't. I've read some books on what's been proven or not proven. Again, I don't pretend to be an expert, but I tried to make sure that I had enough, that I felt that I had enough research to make that part of my stories authentic. And most of my readers think I do.
Any other questions?
Anybody? How am I doing on time? Well, I'm doing good.
You're doing great on time.
And nobody has any other questions, huh?
If I turn the mic off, will there be more questions? Well, thank you, Randy. I found it very enjoyable. I hope you did too, folks. Randy will be at the table there with copies of the books he told you about. Please remember that you have free admission to the Harmon Museum while you're our guest, and also that there's a discount in our gift shop at this time, 10% off. Thank you so much for joining us, and hope to see you next month. Take care.
I got books on every table. If whatever book you want or group, just bring them up and I'll sign them and take your money.